welcome everybody.
Oh shoot! I forgot my beer. It's the most important part of this. Hold on. Be right back.
Welcome everybody. Doc,
Pause.
we got Dr. Mike Parsons joining us. How's it going, Doc?
That's going pretty good. Hanging in there.
Quarantine
Chris?
live.
Quarantine live. Yep.
Yeah. It's so the idea here is we're having a happy hour. We're inviting everybody in Facebook land to join us for happy hour with a scientist. And
it's the best happy hour you can have. So
that's right. Science and bourbon.
There you go.
What else could you ask for? Great combination. Only good things can come of that. And we should think about like some science experiments that we could do that could have volatile results. I think that could be fun.
I like it.
Oh, Dan's back.
I'm back. Got the beer.
There we go.
All right, nice.
Most important part. I really have no idea how I forgot the beer for a happy hour.
Yeah, especially since I just got up and went and got a beer. But
yep.
Dr. Tracy, how's it going?
Yep, got all kinds of people logging in here.
I think it's important for everybody who's joining us to understand that this is happy hour. And so, take a minute. We're not going anywhere. Go to your fridge, get your beverage of choice, and kick your feet up. Get ready to get scienced by the doc. And
yeah, can we do like a drinking game to where every time we say the word water, everybody's got a
water.
I think we should do it.
Well, for Captains for Clean Water, is a really strong organization about water, and Captains for Clean Water puts water first. And the water school is very, very happy to help.
I'm like 10 steps behind already right off the rip here. So if we continue that game, it's not going to end well. I know that. So, all right. Well, Doc Parsons, thanks for joining us today. We did one of these last week with Dr. Steve Davis from Everglades Foundation. I think it was really good for, a lot of our supporters just to log in and, hear from some scientists, and figured we'd might as well turn it into a happy hour since it's kind of boring sitting here staring at your computer screen when you're not drinking beer. So instead of concealing it in our bottles like we did last time, we're just going to crack open a beer or a whiskey or whatever and hang out.
Plus, I think it's kind of like, it's a new deal now with the Corona quarantine that it's acceptable to be, having a beverage while working. And I don't know.
Was it not before?
No, it was. Yeah, it was.
There you go.
Just not for everybody. Like Mike can't exactly, go cruising around FGCU pounding brews. But
no,
now,
definitely.
Now he's working from his house. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah, especially at 6 o'clock on a Friday.
Yeah. I used to joke around about keeping a bottle of whiskey in my desk drawer, and thought it was kind of funny. And then I realized probably a lot of people think I'm serious. I was not serious. So, but I'm like, I might be setting the wrong impression here on that. But not anything wrong with whiskey, of course, but in your desk drawer at work, might have to think about things there, maybe.
Yeah. So, all right. So, Dr. Parsons, you're obviously very involved with all the water stuff at FGCU, at the water school, Professor Marine Lab. You're on the Blue-Green Algae Task Force. You got all kinds of certifications and science degrees and all kinds of stuff like that. Why don't you tell us about all that?
All right. Well, I guess, I was always interested in the environment. My parents would always take me out on the water, take me hiking, so on and so forth, go hunting with my dad, did a lot of fishing, of course, growing up. Grew up in New York, grew up on Lake Ontario. My dad was in the Air Force before that, so I spent a lot of time on Jersey Shore and Delaware, down at Lewis and Rehoboth. And so I really liked the water, and then I really started getting into the ocean, even as a kid. And went up through college and things like that, and just really thought that was something I want to do with my life, was just dedicated to learning more about the ocean, and in particular learning about water quality. And so I basically dedicated my career to teaching students about it, doing a lot of outreach and talking to the public about it, and a lot of research. I do a lot of research too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people in the Southwest Florida area are probably used to seeing your face with on the news talking about the cyanobacteria stuff. You did a bunch of experiments and testing on that. Just how it's aerosolized.
Yeah, and that was pretty interesting because my education is basically I'm an oceanographer, and so I study the ocean. And with the cyanobacteria blooms, they're freshwater phenomenon, and I would just kind of be like, well, I do ocean stuff. I don't really do freshwater stuff. And it's kind of funny because did I tell you guys the name of my boat yet?
Oh, hey,
Brim Reaper.
I think we should make listeners guess the name of your boat.
Guess?
Oh, I just too late now. I already spilled the beans on that one.
Let's see who heard it. I heard it.
Well, just tell me what it is.
The Brim Reaper.
Oh, Brim Reaper. That's clever.
I actually knew that. You must have told me that before. I like that.
Yeah, it's not a great boat, but it's a boat, and then but it's especially, funny when you're out in Estero Bay or San Carlos Bay or out in the Gulf and you have a boat called Brim Reaper, and it's like,
yeah,
what are you doing?
I think all boats are great boats in their own right.
Yeah, definitely. So anyway, so with the cyanobacteria issue, I could just, after 2016 when they had such a problem on the East Coast, and I was just thinking, I said, FGCU should be doing something. We should be getting more involved in this, and I do ocean stuff, and then it came around with 2018, and I said, well, this is just really crucial. We need to get more involved, and then people, we're just starting to report that it was affecting their breathing. And they were just concerned that they were breathing in toxins and things like that. And so I talked with colleagues at the Center for Disease Control, CDC, and NOAA, National Atmospheric and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I just said, well, what do we know about this? And kind of went back and forth on it. And the consensus, we need to get more data on what's in the air. And so then, I talked back to the CDC crew, and they did a lot of work with the red tide and how the toxin gets in the air. And so they said, oh, yeah, we worked with so-and-so out in Arizona. Why don't you give them a call? So I call out there, and, oh, no, he retired a couple years ago. I took over his lab. You need to talk in so-and-so on the East Coast. So I call back over to the East Coast. And then I ended up talking with Jordan Pesha, who's up at Yale University and does a lot of work with airborne pathogens and things like that. And so he said, yeah, we can help you out. And so he sent down these air samplers, and they're basically just like this big canister. And they just have a vacuum pump on it, and it just sucks air constantly. And it can filter the particles out of the air. And the smaller the particles, the deeper down in your lungs they get. So we set those up in some various places, and we found out that the toxins from the cyanobacteria blooms in Cape Coral, they were associating with particles that could get all the way deep down into your lungs, all the way down to your air sacs. And so that meant that people could be exposed to the toxins just by breathing them. And I guess I don't know if it's ironic or interesting, but here we have coronavirus, and it's a very, very similar thing. So we were all talking about this because, and we'll talk later about it. We're going into what, midnight on this, you guys said? So,
yeah.
I have another beer truck coming anyway.
2 a.m.
Till we run out of beer.
But we've gotten some more funding from Florida Department of Health, and that first project was actually funded by NOAA with their event response program, which was awesome. And with the coronavirus, Florida Department of Health obviously has their hands full right now, and the CDC has their hands full. But we were just scratching our heads, and we're like, we're sampling the air anyway. Maybe we should try sampling for coronavirus too. And so but that's way too far outside of my background. I'm an oceanographer, and plus the air samplers that we have, I did follow up on it, but the air samplers that we have, the viruses won't stay viable, so we won't be able to detect them later on. And so I look to try retrofitting them and stuff like that, but it just won't work. But it's a rabbit hole. A lot of this is a rabbit hole in one sense. And one thing that Captains for Clean Water, Daniel, you have to drink there when I said that, right? But with Captains for Clean Water, what's awesome that you guys do is you help focus, and you help kind of bring the public in, and you focus on some issues. Because as a scientist, I do some cool stuff and this and that, but there's a lot of rabbit holes around that I can try to chase the rabbit down into. And it might be a cool project, but on the other hand, it's like you gotta keep your eye on the ball, keep your eye on the prize.
Yeah, I think that's the first time anybody said my name and focus in the same sentence. So unless it was like a direct order,
usually,
Daniel Focus.
Yeah, usually Daniel's name is followed up by Focus.
Well, I think didn't you take one of my classes at FGCU, Daniel? And I recall saying that all the time. No, he never took one of my classes. I'm just kidding. But
yeah, Mike, that's pretty interesting. To think of possibilities like sampling air to see, especially in like big cities and stuff like that. Like is coronavirus present in just in the air in these areas, or even in like stores, like enclosed, somewhat enclosed environments like grocery stores and stuff like that. But you say that, Daniel and I, as yourself, when the blue-green algae stuff was, at its peak over here, we were spending a ton of time out there, documenting it, bringing news reporters there, trying to bring attention to, that symptom. And I don't know, probably what, Daniel, like a month into it or so, we both had respiratory issues.
Bad. Real bad.
Ended up, we both had
the Rona,
pneumonia.
I think.
I ended up having double lung pneumonia, and it was, no doubt in my mind as a result of, going out and being around it every day for a month. And we, kind of didn't know better necessarily. We'd wear a face mask and whatnot, but that's not really adequate for filtering that stuff out. So
and I mean it lasted for what, like 5-6 months. We had coughs. Like, I mean, my wife was ready to kill me. His wife was wishing that whatever he had was going to kill him just so he'd stop coughing. I mean, it was just all night long, all day long. It was just like there's like that persistent, tickle in your chest. It was not so fun. And our idiot selves were out there. Like at first, I mean, we were like sticking our fingers in it, like didn't have face masks on or any. Like it was we definitely lost some brain cells from being around that stuff. And I don't know if it was red tide or cyanobacteria or just a combination, but we both have pretty bad asthma, and just the constant exposure to it was definitely not a good idea. After a week or so, we started figuring out like you got to wear the respirators, and we went and bought some like the real deal, like 3M double.
Yeah.
All right.
Dana's
So
got a
on
good
the-
suggestion. Hold on. Dana's got a good suggestion for happy hour is to help Cabbage Key go buy a gallon jugs of Cabbage Key creepers. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, love it.
highly
I think
recommend
we
that.
should. Our next one, I think everybody should be that's on our live stream should be forced to drink an entire gallon jug of cabbage creeper.
So why don't we fill in? I have to admit I don't know what cabbage creeper is.
Well, it's like it's a signature drink out at Cabbage Key, and it's basically kind of like a pina colada with, I think, Kahlua in it on the rocks, not blended up.
Yeah, it's some kind of crazy rum drink.
The idea is that it's like so delicious that you start drinking them, and then a little while later they creep up on you. So, but you should definitely have one.
And so
something worth experiencing.
Cabbage Key, you have to get there by boat too, right? So
this is true.
Yep.
We're talking this is an adventure.
Yeah, it takes some commitment.
For those of you that want something to
do,
we got an adventure for you now.
Yeah, it's a worthwhile mission for sure.
Yep.
We'll tell everybody this. So for those of you that are not from Southwest Florida, Cabbage Key might be around here, but it might not be. It could be in Europe for all you know, right? So you have to go find this island called Cabbage Key. You know, it's like, what was that? Let's just simplify it. It's in Southwest Florida. So
yeah, Pine Island Sound. So on the algae note,
very cool place.
Let's talk about the algae since we were on that. You're on the Blue-Green Algae Task Force. That was something that Governor DeSantis formed for the first time to kind of work on these issues. It's all academic scientists. You're our representation here from FGCU in Southwest Florida. Can you tell us a little bit about the task force and kind of what your objectives are?
Well, really, the ultimate objectives are to give the governor and the legislature some recommendations on what can be done or done better regarding nutrients going into Lake Okeechobee and the blue-green algal blooms. And so we've spent a lot of time so far basically learning about how the state operates. And so, we've had discussions with Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Florida Department of Health, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and just learning the process. And so, early on it was interesting because, it was almost like we would scratch our heads a little bit and be like, well, why do you guys do things that way? And then, but we quickly realized that the people that we were talking to, they were following the laws, they were following the rules. And so they were doing, and it's the same thing with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They follow the rules that are set up. So really what it comes down to is what can be done. Can we do things better within the rules, within the guidelines that are provided by the legislature and by Congress and the federal government in the case of the Army Corps of Engineers, or do we need to change some things? And in which case we would change the policies and change the laws. And so this first pass through that we did this first year, we were really trying to rush to get recommendations on Governor DeSantis's desk in October. He could get it to the legislative committees, and so they could really start bringing it up. Because we had an earlier legislative session this year, as you guys know. So, there was a couple setbacks with hurricanes and things like that. We had another setback with coronavirus for our last meeting. But that first sweep was like, what can we do within the rules we already have that will require, minimal tweaking of the system. And I think this next pass that we do, it'll be like, okay, well, maybe we need to see what can we, what's going to take a little bit more effort. What might take, more revisions or changes to the laws and regulations, so on and so forth. And I think, one of the important things to really keep in mind is, everybody has a stake in this, and we at least have to respect the fact that there are many different people sitting at the table. A lot of different people need water. We need to use fertilizer to raise crops. That's just the way the system is, and if we want to feed everybody. But we have to find solutions that basically everybody can survive on or live with. So for example, we just can't say no more fertilizer. That just won't work. So Chauncey Goss, I don't know if he came up with the quote himself. I think I heard him say that he got it from someone else, but he said, in terms of fertilizer, it's like, a teaspoon of sugar. And he said it's a lot easier to keep that teaspoon out of the water rather than try to get the dissolved sugar back out of your tea or your coffee or whatnot. So let's just think about that, and so look, we need to use fertilizer. Okay. But how can we keep it out of the water? So I think we're trying to be practical in that sense and not political. I mean, that's why it's academic, so we're just trying to look at the facts, trying to be like, okay, well, maybe we can try this or that.
Yeah, and that certainly makes sense. And I think there's a little bit of, I wouldn't say confusion, but kind of confusion just on how do these nutrients that enter the waterways, how do they affect algae blooms? What's the role they play? Because there's kind of splitting hairs, but we've seen just some of the kind of politicized spin on it. It's like, well, the nutrients don't cause these algae blooms, but we're witnessing them making it a lot worse. Cyanobacteria, the red tide, really all algae feeds on nutrients. So can you just kind of explain how that works?
Well, I think the first thing to maybe distinguish is red tide versus the blue-green algae. And so with the blue-green algae in freshwater, Lake Okeechobee, in our rivers, freshwater canals, slightly salty, brackish canals, the cyanobacteria, the blue-green algae, definitely react to the nutrients. And so you add more nutrients, you heat up the water, cyanobacteria will probably outcompete everything else in most cases. So that's why the Blue-Green Algae Task Force is looking at nutrients, because there's basically a direct this causes that relationship. With red tide, it just unfortunately is much more difficult. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that red tide has been around probably for thousands of years. It's been reported by the Spanish conquistadors back in the 1500s, and they mentioned that the Calusos would not eat fish or would not eat shellfish during certain times of the year, and they would mention eyes burning and coughing, so on and so forth. Now back then there weren't a lot of nutrients coming from human activities, and so the red tide had to come up with nutrients from other sources. So whatever started red tide, 500 years ago is probably the same thing that starts red tide now. And we think it happens offshore, maybe 50 to 100 miles offshore. When the red tide moves closer to shore, I mean, by the time we notice it, even this last year, which wasn't that bad of a bloom, it was like, oh, all of a sudden there's a bloom, right, down near Naples. And so and there really wasn't any rainfall or anything then. It was kind of a dry October, and it's like, okay, well, so we probably did not really have an influence on why it started, especially this last year. But once it starts, do we have a role in it persisting or in staying strong or getting stronger? I think that's a big question. And I don't know if it's coincidence really that after Irma, we had a huge red tide, and we had a huge red tide after Wilma and Charlie, and we had a huge red tide back in 1996. But, I think, one of the biggest red tides was back in 1947, and so there were not nearly as many nutrients coming off of land back in 1947 as there are now. I mean, there was 1/10 of the people living in Florida back then, maybe 1/3. And so, unfortunately, it's just difficult. But trying to reduce the nutrients in the freshwater systems will reduce the nutrients out into the ocean, and that definitely will not hurt. So I think we just need to keep our eye on the ball on that.
Yeah, it's basically, looking at what we can do in our freshwater systems that at least we know by reducing those, it's less likely that we're going to exacerbate the red tide, or less likely that we're going to increase the duration of the blooms and whatnot. I mean, when that stuff comes in shore and comes in contact with nutrients, we know that that's food, and that it has the ability to feed off of that.
And there's a lot of other algae, that as fishermen and you as a scientist are, I'm sure, familiar with, that kind of macroalgae that grow in the estuary. I was actually out on the boat with Captain Rhett Morris a couple of weeks ago, and he was showing me around Charlotte Harbor, around a lot of the canal outflows. You can see this like gnarly looking, hairy, it looks like it grows in like perfect little like spheres and covers the bottom. They look like little like cotton balls. Yeah. But they get pretty big, like the size of a basketball or larger. And that's something, he's been fishing up there for 25, 30 years. And it's something that they're noticing just around, the creek outflows, something, that's pretty new, and those are places where there's a lot of, urban runoff. So there's a lot of other algae, the red tide and the blue-green algae are the big ones that people talk about, but, really all these different, the rolling moss that we get, I don't know what the science word is for it, but it's like little tumbleweeds underwater, all that stuff feeds on the same nutrients. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that filamentous algae that's pretty heavy up in Charlotte Harbor and Bull Bay right now. Big, long, stringy, almost looks like hair.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
so we've actually got. Go ahead.
One thing that's been interesting with that, we did a big study with Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation, their marine lab, SCCF Marine Lab, and with Nova Southeastern, and it was funded by City of Sanibel, Fort Myers Beach, City of Fort Myers, and Lee County, and this was probably 10 years ago now. And that was when we used to have these big seaweed pileups up on the beaches, the drift algae, the strandings, and things like that. And one thing that was interesting was we tended to see the most algae, at least up in San Carlos Bay and maybe in Estero Bay and things like that. It was like this time of year when you'd see it start growing and things like that. And then for a lot of the species, when it got hotter, they seemed to die back. And so one of our questions was, all right, when it's hotter, it's wet season, but a lot of this algae was dying. And so was it too hot for them to grow? And so then it was like, were we dealing with, it was just a little unsynchronized. It was asynchronous, where when the major nutrient inputs were coming in, it didn't quite match with the optimal temperature or the optimal light conditions. The problem was, though, that, and I said this in front of the Lee County commissioners when we did a presentation, was, all right, you guys funded us for 2 years. We didn't have a big algal bloom washing up on the beach, so my recommendation would to keep funding us, because you won't have a problem while you give us money to go and study it. It seems like there's only the problem when you're not looking at it, and then all of a sudden,
yeah,
all right, we're gonna look at it now.
Like that's an interesting point. Like looking at like 2018, 2016, when we had such issues here, that's where we did have those nutrients early in the year when our water temperatures were still a little bit lower. That's interesting. Interesting thought. Got a question here that's kind of along the lines of you drawing comparison between, red tide toxin, brevetoxin, and freshwater toxins, microcystis. In terms of human exposure pathways, can you or is there a compare and contrast the difference between the aerosolized red tide and microcystis?
So the answer is yes, I guess, in a simple sense. But when you look at the toxins produced by the blue-green algae, the cyanobacteria, they're a different chemical compound versus red tide toxins. And the red tide toxins associated, with red tide, which is out in the Gulf of Mexico, and it'll get up in the bays and things like that a bit. But it tends to blow in with the sea breeze, so it's coming, from the west in towards the east inland, whereas the blue-green algal toxins are probably just spreading out from wherever your bloom is. So it could be your canals along the Caloosahatchee, along Lake O, or over St. Lucie River and Stewart. So the first part of it is the brevetoxins for our biggest acute exposure concern right now for breathing in brevetoxins is just it's a respiratory irritant. And so if you have asthma, it could cause inflammation to the degree where you could be at a higher risk, and you may end up in the emergency room or things like that if you don't have your respirator or your inhaler, I guess it is, and things like that.
And brevetoxin, for everybody listening, brevetoxin's the salt water, the red tide.
The red tide one, yeah. And then with the blue-green algal one, it's we still don't understand the symptoms that you guys were reporting, where you had respiratory issues, flu-like symptoms, pneumonia. So that's probably an acute response that we need to get more data on. But the other concern would be that chronic exposure may be related to non-alcoholic liver disease. And then there's some that it may be related to neurodegenerative disorders like ALS.
Mm-hmm.
We need to do a lot more work before we really start, saying that's an issue. And, it's very comparable to what we're going through with the coronavirus right now, where it's, there's a lot of talk. Should we be opening everything up? Exposure, the economic impacts we're going through right now. Is it worth suffering through this economic shutdown when there's not, I don't want to say this in a wrong way, when people aren't necessarily appreciating the risk or the mortalities that are being associated with it right now,
Mm-hmm.
and so people are really struggling with that decision. They're like, listen, this is really affecting me, this is really affecting us, but we don't know how it's affecting all this other, the public health as a whole. And we're kind of dealing with that with the cyanobacteria, where it's like, what does this risk represent? And it kind of comes back around to when you guys mentioned that you were wearing respirators and things like that when you were taking people out. And, the CDC is trying to start a study right now. We're involved in a study with Harbor Branch Oceanographic and Florida Atlantic University, funded through Florida Department of Health, where, we're trying to get cohorts of people, for example, fishing guides on Lake Okeechobee, to, sample the air, sample their blood, nasal swabs, urine samples, so on and so forth, to see what the exposure risk is. But I know the two of you, and a lot of other people, on this Facebook right now, this Facebook Live, if you were sitting there and you had clients come on your boat and you put on a mask and you give blood and they do nasal swabs and we put out a giant air sampler and it's like, what's going on? It's like, it's okay. They're just wondering if we're poisoning ourselves. Come on. It's the same thing that we're dealing with coronavirus exposure. It's like, all right, you want to open the stores? Do you want to go and do this and that? And it's a risk assessment. I mean, that's really what we're dealing with. All of this is we're assessing the risk of exposure, and it's difficult, and so, and I think probably Floridians, especially in Southwest Florida, are probably heightened a bit to it because, we know about the cyanotoxins and the red tide toxins. And, I'm rambling a bit, but I guess the other part, swinging back around on that, we need to learn more about the chronic exposure to red tide. So if there are people that are always on the water, like you all are, or people that live on the water and, they're like, oh yeah, during season, I'm just coughing on, or the people that are exposed to both of them at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
So what about the two
And that's,
toxins together? That's unknown.
There's the cases where you're exposed to it for a week or so versus the person who lives on a lake or a water body that there's cyanobacteria blooms on it every single year. And what are the lasting effects? I think the long-term studies is the thing that exactly what it is. It's long-term. It takes a long time to conduct them.
Yeah, and that's a question I have just as a non-scientist, as a citizen. You've got. I think we can, look at other examples. Here in the United States, here in Florida, outside, all across the globe, really, and see that that there's generally when you introduce a ton of nutrients to an area, you'll see changes. You'll see. Like the dead zone in the Gulf from the Mississippi and outside of the United States and other having issues like that. One of your colleagues, Dr. Greg Tully, I've seen him give a couple of presentations where he talks about the no regret solutions. Like, are we going to sit around here and wait for 5, 10, 20 years to get a lot of these answers, or are we going to work on it's not really but we can work on these no regret solutions at the same time to where we know that having less nutrients in the water overall is a better thing. It's better to have less nutrients in the marine environment, especially when they're artificially introduced. I think that's an important thing. I mean, it's like, are we going to wait, 10 years to find out if, we're all going to get some gnarly disease that totally sucks? It's, who knows? I mean, or are there things we can do now kind of while we're waiting for those solutions? And, as they come in or some of the science, I should say, as that's coming in, we can realize like, all right, we need to kick these into overdrive rather than, wait another 5 years and go, oh shit, we got a huge problem. We got to deal with all this stuff. It's kind of, I don't know. It's frustrating because you wish you had all the answers right now, but I know that's not how science works.
Yeah.
But there.
Go ahead, Doc.
Daniel, there is low-hanging fruit, and I think that's what the Blue-Green Algae Task Force tried to identify, and there's other groups out there who tried to identify it as well, and I think that's the first place to start. And then, probably the one thing, if I had to give a 2-second spiel about the Blue-Green Algae Task Force, I would say the best thing we need the biggest bang for the buck is what it comes down to. What can we do quickly that'll have the biggest effect? What's easy now, and then we can get into the complicated stuff later on, and then just looking at some of the feeds that are coming down. There was an earlier question about, can you use different kinds of fertilizer? And, there's like nitrate fertilizer, which runs off into the water pretty quick. There's ammonia and urea-based fertilizers, which stick onto the soil fairly well. And there's a lot of different agricultural, businesses, facilities, farmers that are using more urea-based or ammonia-based fertilizers. And on one hand, it doesn't make a difference, but on the other hand, you're seeing some different responses because they still do get in the water. So it gets complicated pretty quickly. There's one person who said, we need to killing aquatic plants. I agree. That was an easy solution 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, but now we have a whole bunch of sludge on the bottom that's not helping anything. So we need to find a different solution, but it might be more expensive. And that's a problem that we're dealing with a lot of this. Someone's asking about private citizens around Lake Okeechobee. I think we do need to engage them. I mean, if you look at the city of Clewiston, they are pretty much based on U.S. sugar. So if U.S. sugar is driven out of business or whatnot, there's going to be a lot of people there that need a job, and that's got to be something that's going on. And so, there's a ton of great solutions coming here, and compensating fishing guides with bait and gear, etc. We need to build trust. They need to trust what we're doing. And so there's the human factor. And as a scientist, I don't think about that a lot. I think about it more and more now that I'm, talking with guys like you, and I'm on the algal task force and this and that. And, you all are the voting public. You're the real power in all of this. And Captains for Clean Water really helped to focus a lot of this interest. And so it's now a voting block. And, as a scientist, I can provide data, or you can be like, well, how do we answer this question? Daniel, well, what about this? And I was like, yeah, that's a good question, And so, we're looking at some of the herbicides affecting seagrasses, or we're getting ready to, it's a to-do list question because there's a lot going on. But, it's just a matter of what can we do now? What can we be like, yeah, this is going to take some more time. But I think we need to focus on the here and now, and everybody can do something. Everybody. I was driving down the road today. I went out on a sterile bay because there was a fish kill reported by to FWC, so I went looking for it for another project I'm on. Couldn't find it, but I saw somebody fertilizing their yard. And I was thinking, man, maybe I should just stop and be like, but they might not appreciate me. Just be like, listen, do you really need to do that? Maybe use half as much. I don't know. But there's just things as simple as that. So
yeah, and I think that's a good point. Looking at alternatives, fertilizers with higher absorption rates, whatever, but also timing of when and application methods, when you're fertilizing, and then also the methods in which you're fertilizing, topically versus, down in kind of ways that would bind it into the soil better or whatnot.
There's a good question on here that I have no idea what the answer to this one is. It says Miami has already had record-breaking heat for this time of year. Do they have models that can take into account temperature and amount of nutrients going into a water body to determine whether there will be an algal bloom, and if so, the extent of it?
So basically a model that could help us forecast algae blooms.
I do not know of one. I know we do not have one for Lake Okeechobee, and that's on the wish list, if you will, to develop that. I do know at the Turkey Point nuclear power plant, their cooling water canals and waterworks tends to get cyanobacteria blooms on it because of the higher water temperatures. So they do have, various areas they could tweak these models for. But it's amazing, because even with, I do a lot of work with the folks up on Lake Erie, and they have the huge blooms in Western Lake Erie that they've been dealing with. And there's, I think it's Malma Bay up there, Malma Bay Brewery. They actually came out with a beer called the LG Bloom beer. So it's like it's got maki in it, so it's a green beer, and proceeds go to support blue-green algal bloom research. But they've got a lot of resources going at it, and they're having a difficult time with the forecasting too. And so for some of these questions, they're great, and I think we're dealing with two issues. Number one, is it just such a complicated question we need to take baby steps, basically? Or number two, have we just not funded it because it hasn't really risen to the top of the priority list on that? As you both know, water quality, especially in South Florida and Southwest Florida in particular, and these blue-green algal blooms have become a state priority in the past year. And so, I think we'll see that more and more. Unfortunately, that's a downside of it, because we're probably, with warming temperatures and warmer water body temperatures, be it in lakes and ponds around the nation and coastal waters, we're probably going to see more of these blooms.
Yeah. And do you think if we had more data, is it data or data? What do the scientists say?
I think it depends if you're British or American.
American.
Data.
All right. So if we had more data, do you think is that something that would that be helpful for, making some of these models or being able to at least, predict? I mean, is that the issue? Is the data the issue, or is it just developing the models? That's, heat and nutrients
Yeah.
It seems like a simple equation to a non-scientist. I'm sure there's a hell of a lot more complication that I'll never be able to understand. But I mean, I'm just wondering, is that something? Yeah. Is that even feasible?
The models are only as good as the data you feed into it. And so that's the easy answer. I remember talking with Bob Weisberg, who's up at University of South Florida, and he's working on a model for red tide. And with his modeling, it suggests the bloom starts at the shelf break, so 200 miles offshore, when there's a thing called a loop current that goes in the Gulf of Mexico, and every once in a while the current kind of hits that shelf break, which is, you guys know it, but the water all of a sudden gets really deep. It drops off like a cliff. And so when the current kind of impinges and gets up on it, it'll bring up deep water with nutrients. And so his modeling and the data that he's input into it suggests that can actually start the red tide. And I said, Bob, we need, what do you need to get this out there and operational? He said, we need more people 200 miles offshore collecting data. And you can't, these are data you can't pick up with the satellite, right? Because the satellite can only really pick up, the upper 3 feet or meter or something. And so we're talking, 50 meters down or something like that. And so you need, some, we don't have the satellite technology, it's not like Star Trek where you can figure everything out real quick or something like that. So we'll have to send boats and ships out there, or, get some buoy systems.
All right, I gotta take a pause here. I gotta go get another beer. I'm out of beer. Going to get more.
All right, so that's a good point, Mike. When you're talking about the collection of data, and you said buoy systems, my first thought as a fisherman is there a way to retrofit some of those into like the weather buoys, or even commercial fishermen, with longline gear, stuff like that are already there that would be able to take that sample and upload the measurements of it via satellite, or does the sample physically have to go to a lab?
No, I mean, there are, with technology, as you know, everything's improving. We're getting better, better battery times on things like that. We're getting better data feeds, so on and so forth. So I think what it comes down to, for example, in the Gulf, they have the Gulf Coastal Ocean Observing System, GCOOS, and it's part of the Ocean Observing System, which is a nationwide thing. And then on the East Coast, we have SICORA, which is the Southeast Coastal Ocean Research Association. Mm-hmm. And they both basically meet. I'm trying to draw it, right? They meet, like you have GCOOS in the Gulf and you have SICORA over in Miami and the East Coast. And they meet basically right here. And that's where the jurisdiction kind of turns over. But they're putting buoys out there. They're collecting a bunch of data, this observing data, feeding it into NOAA. And NOAA has all the data going in, and that feeds a lot of these ocean circulation models and things like that. So we do have that capability. And they have meetings, conference calls periodically, and they're like, what kind of data do we want to start collecting on these ocean observing systems? What data and where do we need these data points to come in? And so we do have a bit of a blank spot down here in Southwest Florida because it's right at that transition zone. So FGCU, we're trying to fill that in, working with the USF, working with Miami and others within the SICORA system on the East Coast. And we have a couple of funding proposals in to look into it more. So all of that kind of stuff is definitely needed. And there's also a thing that's called the Plankton, what's it called? The continuous plankton recorder. And they would put these on ships going between England and either Canada or the northeast coast of the U.S. And basically it was this almost like a silk piece of fabric that just kind of slowly ran like a conveyor belt. And they would just kind of dump water on it and collect all kinds of plankton. And then they would measure what was collected on these pieces of fabric. They'd cut out a little piece of fabric and then, do some analyses on it. They did different kinds, but they've been doing it for, 50 or 60 years. And so they have these continuous plankton recorder data going back, and you can see things changing over time. And it's really cool. And it's using commercial shipping. And, I know we've talked and you've talked with other groups about getting some of the charter boat captains, getting some of the commercial guys. I was talking with Gene Luciano down in Naples, and he wants to help out with this dead fish project where we're looking to remove dead fish to mitigate red tide. And I mean, there's a lot of people who want to help. You all know that. And I think as a scientist, it's our job to try to engage everybody in the best way possible where, we know that whatever they're doing is important and useful. It's not just say, okay, go and do this, and we don't know how good the data or the samples are going to be, but finding the best way. It's like, yeah, that's a real solid number. Bam, we can plug that in a model. We can plug that in our analysis. Because there are the people out in the water, and everybody wants the water to be better. So why not take advantage of that and link it all up together? It seems obvious. It's just, as you know, it's not the easiest thing to bring everybody to the table and figure out the best way to do that.
Yeah.
So, all right, we got to take a quick break here. I got audience picks here. What are we doing for the next beer? We got Wicked Weed. I literally picked the beers in my fridge that have the hardest possible names to pronounce, especially after you've already been drinking. Wicked Weed Pernicious. I think that's how you say it, Pernicious.
Yeah.
Tocobaga.
I've had that one before.
Tocobaga. All right, first person to pick in the comments. There's a little bit of delay, so we got to give them a second here before we pick which one we crack next. Wicked Weed. All right,
I'm drinking. I got to give a shout out to. I'm doing South Cypress Brewing down here in Naples.
Oh no! I got a crisis going on here. Look at this. Total
and then
disaster.
I picked, this is how they. Whoops, wait a minute,
total disaster.
So I went to the brewery and they just gave me some. So this one's a Sticky Icky.
Nice.
So it's an IPA Icky.
Sweet.
Nice.
This is my first
while we
one.
wait
This
for
one
Daniel
not...
to.
We've got.
What was that? Neva Eva?
Neva Eva. Yeah, Fort Myers Brewery, Neva Eva. This one was pretty solid.
Oh, nice.
I'm very happy about that choice. This one,
yeah,
I
always
got beer all over
my
body. It was a complete explosion disaster. But
you got foam in your beard too. But
I got it. You should see my whole body's covered in explosion.
I think we should start beer reviews with our expert scientists.
Yeah,
could be
I'm totally
that
down.
Would be good too.
Shotgun it. I get a comment here. Shotgun it. Maybe next time. This one's like a 10% alcohol or something crazy. We're not doing that with this one, I don't think.
I should.
I don't know. 7.3.
I saw my
not
niece
a
up there earlier. So I'm going to give my niece a quick shout out. Hey, Hannah. Love you.
We've got my buddy Mike Holiday. He's a fishing guide from the East Coast for, God, he's really freaking old. He's been doing it forever. But
older than you, Chris?
Yeah, older than me. A lot better looking than I am. But he's saying it would be interesting to do a long-term study of health exposed to cyanobacteria, not just around Lake Okeechobee, but on the coast. He's saying, and this is more so just kind of a statement, he had it in his live well and his cast net, where just what are those, what would be the puzzle pieces, I guess, to facilitate incorporating people like Mike into some of those more long-term studies. And that might be something we don't get results of those studies until, decades down the road. But he asked a question, will Kilroy's detect it? Do you know?
What's a Kilroy?
What's that mean, Holiday?
Yeah. Come on, Mike. Can't be using all these technical science terms around us. I think it's some kind of like.
Probably a good time to bring up. I was on IR camera earlier, so maybe it has to deal with the IR camera.
Yeah, let me pull up. I've recorded this. I want to show the fans here what we got. I was a really strong advocate for you staying on this because this is what Doc Parsons looked like earlier. There's Alicia. She's trying to hide behind the scenes now. She's secretly here, but that's what we were getting earlier. Infrared. Looked like you were on the Ghostbusters task force, not the Blue-Green Algae Task Force.
Stop polluting the water. Stop polluting the
water. Let's see.
Well, I could probably answer the first part of Mike's question is,
okay.
I know, for example, the CDC is looking to recruit people for a Lake O study, and well, let me take one step back. So we're doing a study. Adam Schaefer over at Harbor Branch Oceanographic, he's an epidemiologist. They basically study people and disease, and I'm an oceanographer working in freshwater. So, but he's doing the people side of it, and I'm doing the environmental side of it with a couple, Malcolm and Nicole over at FAU Harbor Branch. But anyway, when we ask for volunteers, Cape Coral, when they did it at Broadway Theater last year, 2 years ago, you guys might remember it.
Yeah.
Tons of people lining up at the door, right? We did it in Clewiston. We had 6 people come because it's that trust issue on that, So what my advice to Mike would be is, get him, get me his number and we can get him part of it. But we're looking through either CDC or Florida Department of Health. It's real tricky with coronavirus right now to see how the funding is going to continue. But the idea is get these cohorts and, basically we'll be sampling and asking questions, for at least 3 years. And I know ideally we'd probably want to go out 10 years on that. And so, and this is where it gets into the epidemiology. So I don't know, but let's say you probably want 50 people. And how many of those 50 people are still part of the study after 10 years?
Right.
So we'd want 50 here, 50 in Lake O. We're doing it over in Fort Pierce, not Fort Pierce. We're doing it over in Stewart and things like that on the East Coast. So how do we, we're recruiting people. And and ideally it'd be the people on the water. We don't necessarily need, Aunt Susie, not that there's anything wrong with Aunt Susie over, across the way
she's
over
a nice
there.
lady.
Goes out. Yeah. who's not really exposed. I mean, it might be nice for some controls and stuff like that, but we want the people who are really, at risk, I guess I would say, or being exposed to it. Who's on the water all the day. And that's one great thing, again, with Captains for Clean Water and all the fishing guides and everyone else who's on the water, the tour boat captains, so on and so forth. You guys are on the water more than the scientists are in most cases. You have your pulse on the system, and you know what's going on, and we need to be able to tap into that and link into that and figure out how to translate that into scientific data, and because I'm assuming, I don't know, Daniel, did you catch a fish? Because I heard you were on the water a lot more in the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I did. My
one fish,
quarantine diet has made it a little bit harder than it should have. But I got a big old tarpon the other night. I didn't want to catch it. I didn't want to reel it in. I like watching other people struggle. But I definitely, here we go. You can, right there. I caught it.
Oh, nice.
Captain John Landry. I don't know if he's on here or not, but went out with him and, Rich Tosh is one of my old charter clients. We went out there and caught that one. So, yeah, doing a little fishing.
Sweet. Yeah, my daughter caught a redfish last weekend, so that was nice.
Nice.
Just one, but that's okay. She was using, we had my girlfriend's kids on the boat too, so she just grabbed one of the little fishing rods, and all of a sudden she had a redfish on it. So it was like the biggest fight she ever had, but she brought it in, so that was cool.
Awesome.
We released it, of course.
Funny.
The water is looking, you can tell, the lack of rain and, just conditions right now that our water is looking really good. We were out fishing. When was that, Daniel? Wednesday? We went out and fished Wednesday evening, and it was beautiful. We got on a tarpon bite, but I mean, I don't know how well you can see the water there, but I mean, the water's just turquoise. It's beautiful.
Can you send me the GPS coordinates for that?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
For science. It's for science.
Yeah. I want to do a couple more shout outs here. We got Bear Holman logged in.
Oh, the man, the myth.
Sweet. Captain Bear down in the Keys. Bob Bevel, one of our board members. Bruce Shiner just logged in. He's it's actually PJ Shiner is one of our board members. That's his dad. They're attorneys here in town, and they did a ton for captains to kind of get us off the ground right off the beginning, donated a bunch of airtime and all kinds of other stuff to help us out, office space for a few years. Who else we have on here? Chauncey Goss, he's one of our board members, and the Water Management District. Bunch of captains on here, pretty sweet. It's only showing me some of them. I don't know. I can't really use the Facebook. It's not my expertise.
We've got Mike.
Chuck Stevens is on here. Yep. Chuck Stevens, he's a coronavirus survivor on here.
Who's that?
Chris Peterson.
Yep.
Joe Ellen Wilson from BTT, Bonefish Tarpon Trust. Awesome organization.
Chuck, glad you're
really
feeling
good. Yeah. John Rudolphs, he's one of my old charter clients too. He's the man, caught plenty of tarpon with me. Debbie Culp, she's always up to speed on all this stuff. Bob Bevel with NBC2, he's another one of our board members on here watching. Jessica Pinsky with Fleck, she's the one telling me to shotgun beers. Maybe next time. Maybe next time.
We've got so the Kilroy's is a buoy monitoring system on the East Coast. So probably similar to kind of what we were saying about being able to utilize like weather buoys and stuff like that for some of the just data collection.
Yeah, maybe it's similar to the recon system that SCCF has out. I'd like to learn more about that.
I was actually having another tab open here. That's what it is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and then all that's really important. And I know through the water school right now in the Vester Field Station, we have some sensors that we're putting out. Well, we're trying to get the money. It's a little tough with the coronavirus. I'm not asking for money right now. It's just trying to get it through the system. But these I've never done this before, so I'm a newbie at this kind of stuff. But these are basically sensors that we'll put on some docks and this and that, maybe some of the buoys and the bays and out to the passes. Some more inshore stuff just to get our students involved doing things and stuff like that. But they'll be measuring temperature and salinity and oxygen, chlorophyll, which will be your algae indicator, and the oxygen levels, of course, we know is important with allowing the fish and the crabs to breathe and things like that. And the idea is that it'll cellular network up into the system and then come back to the website, and then we'll just have the live feed. So kind of like this, but instead you'll just see, and data going across. But I want to put these offshore too, especially at like some of the artificial reef sites. And, we're looking at an FGCU artificial reef. We already have a site permit and stuff like that. But I'd love to get something out there that even could look at not only just, general water conditions, but water clarity too. So I'm trying to figure out a system we could see how clear the water is, because that would, really help out diving. But, for fishing different sites, if you knew if the water was really cloudy or clear or whatnot, it'd be good. And it'd just be neat, just getting your pulse on the system more, so besides everybody who's on the water, using some of the electronics that are available out there to try to get a sense of it better. And if not for any better reason than, whatever we can use for monitoring or modeling, just get people aware of it,
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys ever saw, this is probably, it might be 20 years old now, maybe 15 years old. There was a website in Iowa. It was a field of corn, and they would get like 1 million hits a day on watching a field of corn grow. And they were like, wow, grew a lot the last week. It's just, but people just like, wow, look at that. And who knows why, but it just was,
right.
So there's just interesting things you can do like that.
Yeah,
so
an awareness component to also the value of data collection. But I think that's a good point, is looking at ways to use increasing technology to collect data more efficiently. The times of having to physically send a scientist in a boat somewhere to get samples on a reoccurring basis versus, being able to do that with, look how we're, tracking, BTT tracking tarpon now with not only acoustic tags, but satellite tags that, detach.
Yeah.
Ways that we can look at technology like that to get data a lot more efficiently and a lot more constantly. So that folks like yourself can create not only models or studies faster, but more accurately. The more data you have, the more kind of points you have to be able to have a more accurate prediction or outcome.
Yeah, I was reading an article a day or two ago about how, since there's so many airplanes grounded right now, that there's a question about how accurate will the hurricane models be. And so maybe half of the airplanes that were, because commercial airplanes, FedEx, UPS or whatnot, they would all have some data sensors on them. And so if they only have half as much data coming in and that they're feeding into the model, is that really going to affect the hurricane models or not?
There's another question that came in here. Ask the scientist if he will pay to test freshwater fish with tumors for exposure to diquat and glyphosate. I mean, you don't have to pay it out of your own pocket, but the question's there.
Or maybe you do.
There's a lot of questions about the whole herbicide thing. I think we definitely need to have a separate conversation on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should
I 100% agree that the herbicide question is worthwhile and needs investment. And, I think it's just, I'm not 100% qualified myself to do it as the easy answer, but I would definitely love to help and move it forward in any way I can. But I know we were interested in it, looking at seagrasses, because with some of these herbicides, if they kill plants on land and they get in the water, why, how would they kill the water plants too? And or if they're spraying, water hyacinth and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of things that we need to look at more closely now, because we're seeing degradation on many different levels and different scales, and we're not 100% sure the exact cause. We know it's water quality. We know we could be doing a better job, but can we pinpoint something? Or because if you look at, and this is interesting because we have nutrients on one hand, now we're talking about herbicides and pesticides on another issue. But I mean, what brought you guys into this to begin with? It was freshwater releases. So now you have the whole freshwater thing too. So there's different stressors on the system, and they're not all the same answer necessarily. We can bundle it all under water quality, but it's not necessarily the same answer to do that. So
yeah, that's a really good point. We actually see that a lot, where it's a natural tendency to want the same cause or same solution to nutrients or water quantity or conveyance, and they're both problems, equally as devastating probably, but they're separate in their own right. The nutrient loading is a problem, and the solutions to that are different, both geographically and and physically, but also then the conveyance of water. We say a lot of times that the people kind of, to try to help them understand, is what devastated our fisheries here in 2016 especially, and 2018, but just 2016, we didn't have blue-green algae here. We didn't have this crazy red tide, but just the volume of fresh water alone. If we took out of the water, we still had that same volume of water coming out of the Caloosahatchee River, it would still devastate the fisheries, because it's turning a freshwater fishery or a saltwater fishery fresh, and the oysters and the long-term exposure to those depleted salinity levels, kill the oysters, kill the seagrass, the benthic life that lives down in that habitat, and then there's that butterfly effect on everything that relies on that habitat up the food chain. And then it's the total opposite with salinity down in Florida Bay, where we see the lack of fresh water making it to the bay, increasing salinity levels to the point that it kills the seagrass and it kills the oysters. And so as far as salinity goes, what we're talking about is a lot of these projects and Everglades restoration is intended to bring down the peaks and bring up the valleys. And so create more balance. And then on the other hand of that is we have way too many nutrients going into our waters that fuel algae blooms. We have, aquatic plant management, and there's a lot of comments on here where a lot of people would like to see a video like this on that topic specifically, and I think we'll definitely do that. But what effects are those having? Not just the chemical, but also just the practice of you have then mass areas of aquatic vegetation dying and decomposing, re-releasing that nutrient sequestered and then back into the water, creating that muck, which then when the wind blows creates turbidity, which blocks out photosynthesis blocks light and inhibits photosynthesis from happening. There's a lot of chain reactions that happen from or things that go on that are 2 or 3 steps down the road that have a big effect. And I think it's important to look at all those different things, look at all the different practices and how they affect each other, and to also make it create a conversation between agencies, where you have one agency who's dealing with managing vegetation and another who's dealing with trying to remove nutrients or dealing with water quality. Make sure the right hand knows doing that the things the left hand's doing isn't negatively impacting the work that the right hand's trying to do.
And I think that's really important, and I think that's something the Blue-Green Algae Task Force, should continue to do or do more of. And so we've already talked, within the task force about septic tanks and who should be in control of that as a nutrient issue. Should it be? It was under Department of Health, but they were only looking at pathogens. They weren't looking at the nutrient loads. So now we're shifting that over. The state is shifting that over to Department of Environmental Protection. But if you look at hyacinth control, like you were saying, Chris, or if you look at how South Florida Water Management District deals with things versus DEP, how are they interacting? And how does that, like when I talk with FWC folks and DEP, it's like, well, how salty is the water? That determines which one of us reacts to it, and it's like, well, okay, in the morning with the tide, it's 5. In the afternoon, it's 20. What I mean? And so it could be, there needs to be, a better meshing and transition or collaboration among these groups. And I think, with the task force, as an outside group, we can kind of be like, well, couldn't you guys do this or that? But again, Captains for Clean Water and the public, all these comments that are coming down are awesome. And, you need to tell your representatives about this stuff, so on and so forth, or tell captains. And there needs to be consistent messaging, but we also need to be a little bit concerned about information overload. And, I think one thing the Captains has done a great job of is keeping your eye on the ball. Everglades restoration, move water south, get the water out of the Caloosahatchee, get the water out of St. Lucie. Do that, and we'll take care of a lot of these other problems, especially for Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie. Nutrients in Lake O, okay, that's related, but there's a little bit of a separate issue there, But, one step at a time on this, and it's like, what's the phrase? You eat an elephant one bite at a time, but as long as you're taking pretty big bites, you can make progress on it. So,
yeah. And looking at what are the bites that we can take that are going to have the greatest impact, so we're making sure that, we're doing things. And that's one of the things that we look at in Everglades restoration. And, we're not just looking at how do we get blue-green algae out of the canals in Cape Coral. That's a symptom of that system of an ailing and broken system. But how do we get less water during the wet times bombarding this estuary and on the and the St. Lucie River? But on the other end of that, how do we get that water to Florida Bay and the southern part of the Everglades where it's really, really needed? And by getting water south, you hear us say we have to send water south. And that's how nature intended it. That's how nature created it. And so by sending water south, we are then having less water here. And the more we can get that system back to operating as closely as Mother Nature intended, the less symptoms we have to look at addressing. It's kind of getting in the mindset of, rather than trying to figure out and address the symptoms, let's look at and address the causes that are resulting in the symptoms.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So,
all right, we got a comment coming in here. Bentley has finally noticed. This is my dog Bentley. He's the real deal. He wanted to join the live stream here. So people ask what beer he's sipping on. He's only 5 years old. He's not allowed to drink beer yet, but he's chilling on his water bowl in there. He's tripping on something up here. He doesn't like the light on the front porch. I'm outside right now.
What's Bentley's favorite song, Daniel?
Bentley likes Genuine, but he'll do whatever. I mean, he's a music dog.
Yeah.
But if Bentley is 5 years old in dog years, does it make him 35?
No, he identifies as human years.
35 in dog years?
No, he identifies with human years. So we're not letting him drink quite yet.
Yep. It's already 7:15. We said we were going to run this thing till 7:00. Just constant, really good engagement. I think we've got some great topics on the whiteboard here going forward with aquatic plant management, herbicide.
Yeah, people are all about the herbicide thing. Like, we definitely need to do a live on the herbicide, bring in a scientist.
Yeah, we got Captain Mike Holliday here with a little fragment out of what he's saying that I think is good to leave everybody with. Look at the big picture. It's all about water and water quality. You can go a month without eating, but 3 days without water, and you're stone cold dead. We need to protect our water quality for long-term use. You got that right, Mike. That's a fact.
Yeah, Mike's the man. He's got all the quotes.
Yep. We might have to let Captain Holliday do a takeover one of these days on one of our social channels.
Yeah, we gotta get Captain Mike on here. Get him on, go live with him. We gotta get some more scientists. I think we need to spice these things up. It's not that scientists aren't cool, because they're definitely cool, but I think we need to get some different perspectives on here. Let's get some fishing guides.
Dude,
Mike,
what is
chop liver here?
Yeah, you're like one of the coolest.
No,
you know what? I will say this: we know some damn cool scientists. For sure. For sure. Yeah, I mean, Dr. Davis last week, Dr. Parsons this week, definitely some cool scientists. Wish we were drinking beer in person, but Zoom, FaceTime, whatever this thing is, it's the next best thing. Quarantine, got to stay safe. Oh, on the quarantine thing, let's chat about that before we log off here. How's everybody's quarantine going? Mine's going good. It went from a backyard project to a backyard renovation. It was quite the domino effect, but it's good. It's good. I'll show you guys some progress pictures when I've actually progressed a little. I'm more in the demolition stage right now.
Nice. I refuse to purchase toilet paper until this is done. We started this quarantine with 13 rolls of toilet paper. I will not purchase a single roll of toilet paper. I will not accept donations of toilet paper. Nothing. We're getting through this. I don't care if it's 2 years long. she's gonna learn. I got a bidet. I ordered one off the internet day one of quarantine. I got it installed.
Nice.
We're I'm cutting out. We still got 8 of our 13 rolls left, and we're 35, 40 days into it, something like that.
How about you, Doc?
Wow.
How's your quarantine going? Have you had what's the most significant adjustment you've had to make due to the quarantine?
Well, definitely working at home like a lot of other people who can. I appreciate everybody who's out there and, has to be exposed. I'm sure it's tough. I was in today at work as well, but we're dealing with some tough times on that front. But working at home is kind of tough. Homeschooling kids. So my girlfriend's kids, first grade and third grade, and they're learning in front of a computer, but of course computers have games and stuff like that too, and they're used to having a teacher. So I know for the education system and the parents involved, it's tough and it's a big adjustment on what to do. The other big thing is I wisely decided to replace the irrigation pump for our yard, and we're in a big drought right now, right? And so it's not priming all the time, so. So I have a little leak. So if anyone knows something more that I'm missing here on why my pump, there's a leak somewhere, I can't figure it out, but my pump's not priming. So but then the kids get to play in a sprinkler and get in their bathing suits and stuff like that. So that's good.
There's some silver linings, like, not having to brush your hair or whatever to go to work. But, there's, I think as far as
when have you ever brushed your hair to go to work?
I wear a hat, but I'm talking about just the general public. I'm kind of surprised that Dr. Mike is still shaving. I thought we'd see a quarantine beard.
I know. I'm.
Oh, dude,
really
I had it
there.
I was doing it. No, I was starting to grow back, and I was like, wait a minute, I gotta stay fresh. Gotta stay fresh for Facebook Live. So.
All right.
Daniel, I remember, wasn't it like December 30th or something like that, 2-3 in the morning, that we had a bet that we would both shave our beards off. I went through with it. You didn't shave your beard though.
No, I'm not. $1 million donation to Captains for Clean Water. My beard's gone, but until then, it has to be from one person. I'm not doing it. So no, I mean on that quarantine thing. One thing I just thought about this afternoon. I've lived in this house for 5-6 years. I don't know. I've been here for a while. I had no idea we had as many kids in the neighborhood because they're all inside playing some kind of, BS games, iPhone, PlayStation, whatever they're playing. I was not allowed video games when I was a kid, and I don't have the patience for that. But I knew I had neighbors across the street, and we live in. I mean, this is our front yard. Like, we got mango trees and palmettos and oak trees. Like, we're on a little bit of property, and I knew we had kids across the street, but like the last week, like the kids are out in full force. They're riding bikes, they're playing tag, they're running around, chasing after each other on the street, all kinds of stuff. Like, these kids have not shown their face in the last 5-6 years. Like, and now wow. They've run out of iPhone games. So that's definitely one silver line. I mean, there's kids running around all over the place. I literally had no idea a lot of these homes had kids. Yeah. If I lived in this neighborhood when I was a kid, I'd have known every square inch of the neighborhood. But the iPhone thing, the iPad thing, like, it's bad news. Get your kids off of it. Don't let them do that.
Get them outside. Get them outside.
Get them outside. Get them on the water. If our next generation grows up playing with Pokemons and all whatever crap they're into now, they're not going to appreciate the outdoors. So hopefully the quarantines, get outside in your neighborhood, stay 6 feet apart, 20 feet, whatever the rules are, do it and enjoy it, because you only grow up once, and you don't need to do that in front of a screen. You need to do that outside. So with that,
I agree.
Everybody needs to get outside. It's beautiful out right now.
I think we'll
I'm
sign
outside.
off here.
Well, Daniel's outside.
Yeah. I'm about to head out. About to go get on a excavator and front end loader and move some dirt around my yard. I think, when we sign off here.
Is that a wise thing to do with some whiskey?
Absolutely. In a controlled environment. Talking about quarantine, there's some obvious, kind of good things that have come out of people spending more time at home with family, eating home cooked meals. But the reality is also there's a lot of people in our communities across the state, across the country, who are really suffering and are suffering financially from this. And it's, one, in the short term, it's up to us as a community to help our neighbor. And, whether it's providing some food or, offering them up some work, or, if you've got a local fishing guide that you fish with, seeing if you can pick up some of their canceled days. Or, I went and stopped by Hooters for takeout for lunch, and, give the server a little bigger tip than you normally would for takeout meal. Try to help your neighbor get through this stuff. Because I was talking with some of the folks that over at Community Cooperative, and Tracy Galloway runs that operation, and they're doing amazing stuff. And they're seeing it right now. People in our community that would never have expected needing help, who are really needing help. And so that's one of the realities of this, is there's people across the country who are going to be suffering, businesses that are and will be suffering, and coming out of this are going to be that much more dependent on good season and having the tourists come back and the base of our economy come back to rebound our community back out of the impacts of coronavirus. So I just think it is important. We don't want to we want to make the best of quarantine, but also, keep in everybody's minds that it's having a real impact on our friends and neighbors, and try to do what we can to help each other, and hope that we can do everything we can to keep water quality and the fight for our ecosystems in the forefront of everyone's minds, so that when we come out of this, we've got pristine waters to help the economy of these communities bounce back stronger than ever. So
definitely so. Yeah, well said, Chris. I mean, the small business thing, like, we got to take care of all the mom and pops right now, like the big ones. I mean, sure, whatever, like, we're used to getting our chain food. I don't eat chain food, as I do as little as I possibly can, but those mom and pops, like, it's going to be tough for them to get through this. And a lot of them are still closed. I mean, we went and did a little piece with Doc Ford's today. They're still closed, and they were fortunate enough to get in the PPP thing. But look, I mean, there's a lot of families, or there's safe ways we can do this. I mean, if you're a healthy person, going to get takeout food. I love cooking. We've been cooking every night. That we're not eating frozen pizzas, which are also awesome. But I mean, get out and get some takeout. If obviously, like, be careful, be smart. But if you're able to, do everything you can, because I mean, this is going to be a long road to recovery. It's not going to be something that's like, all right, state's opening and everybody go back to normal. Like, it might be a while before our restaurants are allowed to be at full capacity. So, these mom and pop shops that are, blood, sweat, and tears into this, we got to do everything we can. Otherwise, we're going to lose that, very important part of our culture. And if you haven't seen, like, the full profile of me or Chris, food is an important part of our lifestyle. Very much so through quarantine. We're getting worried about this bench I'm sitting on now. I'm gonna have to upgrade, get some better bench, better chair, if I keep eating like
fighting weight. You're getting your fighting weight. That's all.
Yeah. I'm well above my fighting weight. But all right, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Dr. Parsons, for joining us. I think this was very informative. I think everybody learned a lot. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. You guys be safe.
Everybody be safe.
All right. Good night, y'all. Have a good weekend. Stay safe. Stay healthy.